Sunny cities called Wiener. Our main character's name is Neil. He is 20 years old. 7 years ago, namely at the age of 13, he became an orphan. His parents died in a car accident. Since he was an orphan, they wanted to send him to an orphanage. But fortunately for him, a friend of his father took him in and let him live in his house. And now he has been living with them for 7 years. One of the usual days he wakes up, his aunt calls for breakfast. He got out of bed, dressed quickly, and went to breakfast. Leaving the room, he meets Mia. Mia is the eldest daughter in the family. She is a college student. He gets along very well with her. Meanwhile, Neil went into the kitchen and greeted his uncle and aunt. The uncle's name is Ronald. He was a colleague of his father and a very good friend. He is grateful to him for adopting him and allowing him to live in his house with his family. Aunt's name is June. She is always diligent and devoted to her family. She is like an angel who takes care of this family with love and understanding. The aunt asked Neil to call her sister Sunny for breakfast, otherwise there would be nothing left for her. This is the last person who has not yet been introduced. This is the same Sunny. She is a year older than Neil. She was the youngest in the family before the arrival of our protagonist. Neil went up to Sunny's room, opened the door and saw Sunny sleeping. He invited her to have breakfast together, but she said that she was not hungry, and yelled at him for entering her room without permission. Neil apologized and left. Sunny always preferred to be alone in the dark in her room. It's been 7 years, and he still hasn't been able to get along with Sunny. Neil approached his aunt and said that Sunny said she wasn't hungry. Aunt June was surprised and said that this happens every morning. You need to monitor your health. Uncle Ronald comforted June and said that everything would be fine. After all, Sunny is smart. She can take care of herself. Now, let's have breakfast. Neil's family started breakfast without Sunny. After breakfast, he decided to take a walk outside and met his classmate Gobong, who lives near his house. They sat down on a bench and Gobong decided to ask one interesting question. Have you ever seen women's underwear? Neil didn't hear the question and asked again. The Gobong asked, you have sisters? Have you seen their underwear? Neil said no, he hadn't seen them and shouldn't see them. Gobong decided to make a surprise for Neil and took out his sister's underwear from his pocket. Neil does not understand what is happening, and meanwhile Gobong says that he gives them to Neil as a gift because he is his best friend. Neil let him know right away that it wasn't the best present for a friend, but Gobong didn't care. Evening came and they went home on their bikes. Neil went to his room and tried to sleep but couldn't. In the middle of the night, he got out of bed, walked over to his desk, and picked up his best friend's sister's underwear. He does not understand why he is so excited, because it is just a piece of cloth. At that moment, his throat went dry, and he decided to go get some water. He went down to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and took a couple of sips of water. At that moment, he heard some sounds. They were published from his aunt's bedroom. Neil thought she was sick and decided to go check on her. Having risen to the floor, he saw that the door of her bedroom was ajar and decided to look in there. He knelt down and went to the door, stuck his head in, and saw his uncle and aunt having fun. All the details I can't say, use your imagination. Aunt screams very loudly. Neil's heart began to beat very fast. He feels that it is about to break into pieces, but at the same time, he does not know what is happening in the room. He knows he shouldn't be spying on the affairs of adults, but he can't move. His hands began to shake. He still decided to return to his room and lie down on the bed. Waking up in the morning, he saw his underwear stained with something white due to his swelling. He immediately went and relieved them before he was caught. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Aunt June is in the kitchen stacking the groceries she bought from the store. But suddenly Mia comes and spanks June in one modest place. And at this moment, our main character comes and pretends that he did not see anything. Neil decided to ask where Uncle Ronald was now. June replied that he had gone on a business trip in the morning and would not return until a few days later. During breakfast, he cannot look Aunt June in the eyes. He is ashamed. Meanwhile, June decided to wash the family's clothes. Going into the laundry, she noticed Neil's underwear and saw some white spots on it. She thought about the fact that Neil became an orphan very early and could not develop normally like everyone else. Someone has to teach him adult life, and the husband will be a bad teacher. And at the friends who are worried about the Nile, it is only Gobong. An hour and a half after breakfast, Neil met his friend again. The Gobong asked if Neil liked yesterday's gift. Neil blushed and said yes. The Gobong in response offered to bring even more beautiful than the last one, but Neil refused such an offer. Neil decided to ask if Gobong knew anything about grown-up nightly activities. The Gobong replied that only bad guys do it, and we're not one of them. In the evening, Neil returned home and decided to sleep a little. For the whole day, all his thoughts were mixed up, and he cannot forget that night. Neil closed his eyes as his Aunt June entered the room. She invited Neil to talk a little. She asked him a question. Did he try to relax himself with his hands so that the pain would go away? Neil replied that this was the first time he had heard of it. June said that she knew about this and that Neil was already a big boy. He should have known such things for a long time. Neil asked if his uncle did such things. June replied that yes, of course, all adults do it. Neil agreed to take a course on the subject with his Aunt June, but June was suddenly confused and couldn't figure out where to start. She decided to find out if there is any girl he likes. He needs to introduce her. Neil blushed and said yes, there is. She invited Neil to lie down and take off his top and bottom clothes. Having removed it all, June was shocked by what she saw. There was a large tumor. Neil still did not understand what was happening and what was required of him, but he wanted to get rid of the tumor as soon as possible. June invited him to close his eyes, while she herself began to do all the work for him. It's been 10 minutes since the training started. June asked Neil how he felt. Neil replied that he was a little uncomfortable. June understood that he did not understand this home medicine and that he needed to be shown everything in detail. She started from the most difficult moment of this training, but Neil could not stand it and poured orange juice on his aunt. I cannot show and tell everything to the smallest detail. Use your imagination, friends. Seeing his aunt's orange juice on the street, he immediately got up and brought her napkins and then began to apologize. June told Neil to calm down because, on the contrary, he did an excellent job. He asked his aunt if that was the training for adulthood. She said that yes, now he must do it himself without her help in order to be healthy. In the end, she asked Neil not to tell anyone about this training. Neil gave his word that no one would know about it. Meanwhile, June began to reason on her own about how, as she expected, Neil didn't know anything. He's a very kind guy and doesn't have many friends around him. As if he grew up alone in a big castle, not knowing everything that surrounds him. I'm glad I taught him on time, did the right thing, says June. The next morning came. Mia was sitting in the kitchen and asked her mother if her father had come from a business trip. June replied that he would only return tomorrow. Meanwhile, Neil lay in his room and thought about his day yesterday. He began to think that when his uncle arrived tomorrow, he would also be doing the same things as yesterday with June. But at the same time, he remembered that night moment in his uncle's bedroom. He didn't do the same thing. He did things to the bad guys, Neil argues. At that moment, he again had a swelling near his waist. He understood that he needed to relax himself in order to be healthy. But the attempts were in vain, and he decided to go to his aunt for help. He came to June's room and told her his problem. She laid him on the bed and said that now the pain will pass and you will relax. Meanwhile, June couldn't relax Neil for about 10 minutes and decided to use another tactic. She invited him to touch her relaxing toy. Neil was surprised at such a proposal and asked if she would mind. June said no, do whatever you want. After a couple of minutes, she invited him to lie down so that she could remove his tumor. In the end, her tactic with the toy helped a lot, but June's body was covered in orange juice again. Seeing this, Neil apologized and said that he would now bring napkins. But June reassured him and told him to go to sleep. She herself would clean everything here. Neil went to his room, but after 15 minutes he returned back with the same pain, but it became even more painful. June and Neil began to do gymnastics to finally get rid of the pain. They did gymnastics together for about half an hour. They even sweated a lot and got tired.